Today I ventured across the river and met up with my grandma, who gave me some money very kindly. I said thank you, grandma, and then I left grandma at the train station, and then I walked around a bit, and then finally I went to a bookshop where I accrued 2 books, and in this video I'm going to show you those books for no particular reason, and you're probably not interested, but here we are, and you're gonna see the books that I bought with my grandma's money. So thank you, NHS, for paying my grandma a pension so I can have these books. First of all is Flatland by Edwin A. Abbott. So I have quite a few things to say about this book. First of all, it is a Penguin Classics science fiction book, which is, I think these are trade paperback size, so both of the books that I got today are trade paperbacks and they're both Penguin. But I don't know what is going to happen to this series and this next series in my next book, no spoilers. So I do not know what is going to happen there, because I heard that trade paperbacks are essentially going away. I hope not, because I really like this series of Penguin Classic Science Fiction. In fact, the camera, or my phone, is literally being propped up by 2 of them right now. One of them is Cat's Cradle by Kurt Vonnegut, which is my favourite book of all time. Anyway, this is Flatland by Edwin A. Abbott. I was going to talk about it, but then I read the back of this book, the blurb, and the blurb is enough. The book that influenced writers from Carl Sagan to Stephen Hawking, Flatland is set in a 2-dimensional world where life exists only in lines and shapes, until one of its inhabitants, A Square, who Edwin A. Abbott wrote the book under a pseudonym as, so his pseudonym was A Square, has his perspective transformed forever. This brilliantly eccentric classic is an invitation to see beyond our own reality. So, this is a pretty crazy book. It's very short, and it's supposedly like whimsical and funny and weird, but also set in a 2-dimensional world, and is supposed to offer critiques. Well, the Wall Street Journal says, at once a playful brain teaser about geometry and a pointed satire of Victorian manners, and a strangely compelling argument about the greatest mysteries of the universe. Isaac Asimov says, Flatland could lead to very profound thought about our universe and ourselves. So this was published in 1884 in Great Britain by Seeley & Co. And so it is quite literally a book set in a 2-dimensional world, which is kind of just impossible to comprehend. Now, I first heard about this book through this book, which is A Guide to Making Friends in the Fourth Dimension by Toby Hendy, who is the YouTuber Tibbies. Now, she makes videos about science, and she self-published this book about the 4th dimension. And as you can see, there's a ton of stuff in here, crazy illustrations. It's really cool. And this is about the 4th dimension, and it kind of goes through. She has a section called Twosville, which is about kind of being in a 2-dimensional world. And she talks about in her YouTube video about making this book, and in this book a lot, the book Flatlands. And basically the book Flatland is what inspired her to write this book. And I believe it is in the further reading as well. Yeah, maybe it is, maybe it's, I can't find it. Anyway, so I found out about this book through this book. So this book has been on my radar for a very long time, and I'm very excited to get to it because it is obviously a scientific book. So it's a scientific and mathematical book. It's a critique of high-end Victorian society, and it's funny. I do not quite know what more you can possibly want from this book. And also the guy who wrote it, Edwin A. Abbott, is he sounds like a crazy guy. Basically, he went to this posh school in London, which I know people who go to that school. But that's besides the point. Anyway, he became headmaster of that school at 26. And before that, he already had a classics fellowship at Cambridge and was a clergyman. He was one of the most celebrated headmasters of his age. I don't know how you can become a celebrated headmaster, but sure. He educated prime ministers, and then he's just started writing books on Shakespeare and Bacon. And as I said, this book was published under the pseudonym A Square because I guess he can't be seen writing a whimsical and satirical mathematical book. It says its conjectures resonate in Einstein's theory of relativity and modern string theory, and it is today considered a pioneering and much loved classic of speculative fiction. That is pretty intriguing, and it's only 137 pages in this tiny paperback format, and there's like diagrams in here. Flatland by Edwin A. Abbott. Next up, Architecture, From Prehistory to Climate Emergency by Barnabas, Calder. So this is a Pelican book, which is another Penguin trade paperback series of books, and I think this might be my favourite series of books, even though I've really not read that many. But they're basically kind of the basics of a topic. I have one there on statistics, and I actually have a hardcover one on the Cold War. But basically, this is a history of architecture. There is a guy at Cambridge, Dr. James W. P. Campbell, head of Department of Architecture, University of Cambridge. Finally, a book to replace Pevsner's standard history of architecture. Calder retells the story of architecture for the climate change generation. So, I've been eyeing up this book for a while. Now, I've not really read anything at all about architecture. I'm very interested in like urban planning and that kind of thing, but architecture I've just never like read anything about it, or I've basically watched YouTube videos and that's the extent of it. But this book has been on my radar for a long time, for three things. One, it's an interesting topic. I'm very interested in architecture. Two, it's a Pelican book, so I know it's going to be good. And three, it's got my former house on it. I used to live, for most of my life, I lived on in this tower right here. 1, 2, 3, 4, like there or something. Maybe that flat. I don't know. We moved out a few years ago, and we moved into this awesome, still flat. But I've already read the parts about. If you don't know, this is the Barbican estate in central London, and basically, it's a brutalist. Well, it's basically the brutalist kind of collection of buildings in the world, and there's apparently 4,000 people living there, and there's around 2,000 homes, and there are three of these towers, but then there are lots of smaller buildings like this all around, and then there's an art centre connected to it. So there's theatre, there's there's an art gallery, there's a conservatory, there's a cinema, there's basically it's an upper middle class council estate, which is can be controversial, but this is from an age, right, where kind of the labour movement was in full swing, and the designers of this and the City of London Council they had just finished an estate with the same designers called the Golden Lane Estate, which is right by the Barbican and is pretty cool. I used to play like tennis and go swimming there. But that's a regular council estate social housing program, and they got the same designers to design the Barbican, thinking that this would be kind of like the Golden Lane Estate, like a regular estate, but for middle class people, for upper middle class kind of professionals, so like lawyers and doctors and professors and that kind of thing. And they thought that in this time, that in the future everyone would be living in this kind of place, in kind of like a council run estate. And I personally think that's a very good idea. As someone who lived in something like this, I think not only is the Golden Lane Estate pretty awesome, but this is really cool too. And there are lots of people online who like to hate on the Barbican and say it's just a glorified council estate, glorified social housing, but because it's got rich people in it, it's okay. And I understand that, but I think basically I would say that because of the lots of the people who are living in here are very rich, right? You're not going to find a 2-3 bedroom flat in the Barbican for much less than $1 million. Then it is, I guess, more well kept because more money is invested in in keeping the area nice. But I like the idea that in the future everyone could have been living in places like this, and I just think sadly that is not going to happen because of the way politics moved on after the time of like Clement Attlee and that kind of thing. So yeah, but the Golden Lane Estate is also very cool, in my opinion. Although I've not lived there, I have lived in this tower, and that is partly why I wanted to buy this book. I'm very excited to read this book. I might start it now. And this, I haven't really talked much about this book. I've talked about the cover, which is pretty stupid, and especially because the Barbican is like 3 pages in this book. I'm not sure why it's the cover, but this is essentially a history of architecture. So it goes from, as it says, from prehistory all the way up to modern day, and how climate change is affecting what am I saying? Is affecting the way that we build. So it's got life with less energy, or basically no energy, farming, monumental architecture of the city, the Parthenon and Parsa, the Roman Empire and Song Dynasty, China, tradition, energy and mosques, medieval and early modern Europe, coal and the city, Victorian, Liverpool. Anyway. Industry and construction in the USA, 1850 to 1920, the rise of oil and electricity, the post-war boom, today's great energy revolution. So, those are the 2 books that I acquired, and 2 books that I'm very excited to read, 2 books that have been on my radar for a very long time, and been books I've wanted to read for a very long time. But going into the bookshop, I had ideas of books I wanted to buy, and these were not those 2 books, but these are the 2 books that I left with. So, Flatland by Edwin A. Abbott and Architecture by Barnabas, Calder. There's also a building by the Barbican called Barnabas House. But anyway, that's irrelevant. Goodbye.